mind traps. What are the traps that are obstacles to recovery for people? So mind traps, self-sabotage that a lot of people are engaging in that they might not be aware of. What's self-sabotage about? And how that's keeping you stuck. If in fact that you would resonate with that, and why is that keeping you stuck? What are the mind traps, do you think? And how do they drive self-sabotage? Through repetition compulsions. How can you break free from this alternative, painful mind matrix mentality? And why is it not helping you? Why is it really unhealthy for you? And what do you think might be the #1 theme that, if you could identify it, or if you have identified it, would most help you to break free of mind traps, obstacles to recovery, self-sabotage, emotional flashbacks, and many other things, and continuing to suffer? What do you think is keeping you there? What is the theme of that? Are you afraid of this change, do you think, that you most want and need? Afraid of the change and actual healing that will mean leaving an old, well-known, quote, unhealthy comfort zone, unquote. This is what a lot of people have to realize, and for some people it's harder to fathom, figure out than others. But when you get into relationships, most often is the case, then when you get into a relationship with somebody in adulthood who's, personality disordered, cluster B, not mentally well, then it usually stems from childhood in one way or another. But questions about the cluster B that's in your life or was in your life, because it's that focus, it's that very focus that forms a self-sabotaging mind trap. Perhaps not if one is trying to make a decision, but I think there's a lot of information out there that people are already aware of things. I also have a new thing, I've been doing it for a while now, but life story coaching, mind mapping the matrix, and how to break free of the matrix, which is really becomes an alternative reality after abuse. So you're not really who you think you are, because the abuse has defined you, especially from childhood. And so you're not really the reality that you think is so your reality. Yeah, you're experiencing a lot, going through a lot, but it's not your absolute reality. That's the good news. The bad news is that people live in those narratives, in those lenses, with cognitive dissonance and cognitive distortions, and don't realize that they can break free from those. That those are become at a certain point. Not that they always originated as, but they are self-limiting. In the hill, hey there. Yes, it feels like a trap, almost physical, that we can't get past or break out of, but in reality it's not there. Hard to explain. Well, yeah, and the hill, that's a great way to put it, because the trap was first something you experienced from outside of yourself, but then the trap gets internalized, and so the trap goes on. Well, it's not just a trap, but mind traps, cognitive biases, limiting cognitive belief, cognitively distorted beliefs, all the things that make up this, what I'm calling and what people can refer to as a mind trap or being trapped, self-sabotaging repetition compulsions. It's taken in, just like the internalized inner critic. So even when you get away from a person in your adulthood, who might have been a cluster B, the point is then that's all inside of you now to change. And that's where it's really painful for people. What is a good question to ask is, what is the lens that I am seeing my entire experience right now through? Because what you're thinking is driving what you're feeling, and often for people will drive them around in circles with a cluster B, or it's just that cognitive dissonance and then some hell of tremendous pain when people in a sense get sort of addicted. But so the reason that it becomes like your own reality. That's the mind matrix of it all. It's not really your reality. And for most people get in these relationships in adulthood, there are connecting threads to childhood, whether it's a cluster B parent in childhood or whether it's how the seeds of codependency are sown in childhood. But it goes back to childhood, and people really wanting to break free of, well, everybody wants to, but doing the work to break free, have to look at the mind traps, the self-sabotage, their own repetition compulsions, and never mind the borderline, the narcissist, the psychopath, the whatever else, and other clusters, because it's all about what can you do for you now, how can you help you now. And Lottie, often it's hardest to see one's own blind spots. Well, yeah. And, they become blind spots because they become thematic, entrenched patterns of thinking that aren't really yours, don't really define you, but that's how people lose themselves to this type of abuse, many forms of abuse. If you think of a blind spot in your mind or your conscious awareness, using that, what can be a real situation, obviously, but metaphorically even, the blind spots of driving, think about the blind spots of experience, patterns that are still in your subconscious, and how you end up sabotaging yourself. And for a lot of people, when they first come out of these relationships, I mean, a lot of stuff happened with that person who abused you, and a lot of that stuff is that person's responsibility. Yeah, absolutely. But what's happening inside of people, they don't usually recognize that part, because the more you focus on the narcissist or the borderline or whomever, the more you're just going to keep it reinforcing the mind matrix of that reality that isn't really your reality. It became your reality. Taking on reality, abuse, pain, suffering, but it's not really your reality. So it's the mind traps, limiting core beliefs, cognitive distortions, along with cognitive dissonance and a few other things, becomes the end result for too many people, or an end result, until they learn to work further through that. Eric Berne formed ego states this way: parent, adult, child. Very simple to understand, helps people. And in the parent ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings are copied from parents or the parent figure. So think about the power of that also in your life. And the adult ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings which are direct responses to the here and now. So the adult ego state is where rationality, hopefully, some people are so flooded with emotion, they don't have the rationality right now. That's where your rational, reasonable mind would be, or is, where you can think about things when you're not deluged with obsessive thoughts or a lot of feelings. And the child ego state, behaviors, thoughts, and feelings replayed from childhood. And for many people, the child ego state is the most wounded ego state. But these mind traps, otherwise known as thinking traps, otherwise known as cognitive distortions, depending on the words that people use. The older you get, the more you've been through certain kind of things. If you haven't been able to unravel the mind traps or the traps from childhood and on into adulthood, the stronger these things take hold as like a mind matrix, an alternate reality that isn't really true of you or your reality. I just want to go through here quickly a few of the mind traps or thinking traps. And the first one is, like, obviously people develop a mental filter, right? So people only notice what the filter wants or allows people to notice. So if anything is different, positive, might be healthy or better choice, people just tend to go with the filter of what's most like that comfort zone, right? That's not necessarily comfortable, but what's really known. Another mind trap is judgments. So people are making judgments a lot of the time, not even consciously. So if you're making judgments about events or others and the world, you might not be actually seeing the evidence for those judgments, or the evidence might be coming from the subconscious from a childhood place and experience in the here and now. Another mind trap is mind reading, or thinking people can read people's minds in the sense of assuming that we know what other people are thinking, which really hurts people a lot. People think that person thinks, and then your internal critic, takes over. That person thinks I'm an idiot. That person thinks this. Well, we don't know what people think. I'm always quoting this wonderful book title that I think I read the book years ago, but I think it was called What Other People Think About Me Is None of My Business. So that's one way to start getting out of the lens of the sabotaging trap of a mind trap of thinking, like that you think you know what other people are thinking about you, because it's not a good place to focus. So another mind trap or thought trap is emotional reasoning rather than critical thinking, right? And if you're emotionally reasoning, it's sort of like, I feel bad, so it must be bad. I feel anxious, so I must be in danger. But that's being led by one's thoughts. Emotional reasoning isn't really reasoning. Emotional reasoning is reactivity to feelings that have thoughts behind them that are subconscious. So again, it's about getting to those thoughts underneath that. Another mind trap is prediction, believing we know what's going to happen in the future, which is unfortunately for a lot of people a repetition compulsion in and of itself, because people believe that what's going to happen in the future is what might be happening right now and what definitely has been happening all my life. Well, this has happened to me all my life, whatever you might find that to be. I always feel like people don't like me. I'm always getting abused. I don't know, I think I'm a narc magnet. Whatever that belief is, whatever that thought is, this is what you're going to predict for the future, subconsciously. Making mountains out of molehills, another kind of thinking mind trap. Exaggerating the risk of danger or the negatives, which is so easy to do when you're in the mind matrix of an alternate reality that isn't yours, based on all the, self-sabotaging inner critic narrative and the cognitive distortions and the limiting cognitive beliefs. It's really easy when you're hurting and you've been abused to exaggerating. So the risk or the negatives of like everybody out there is going to be like my family was. Everybody out there is going to be like my mother. Everybody out there is going to be like my ex or my current partner or whatever the case may be. And another mind trap is compare and despair. And I usually talk about this as the comparative narrative, but seeing only positive aspects in others, but never in yourself, right? Sort of like thinking everybody else is in a better place than you are. So all these things are really create more pain. Another one is catastrophizing. Imagining and believing that the worst possible thing will happen because there's that narrative again. There's that mind matrix of alternate reality that isn't really yours, that maybe a lot of really negative and hurtful things have happened to you. So then the catastrophizing is, and it's always going to be that way. And people aren't always aware of this, right? A lot of these mind thinking traps are very much at a subconscious level until examined, right? And another one, a key one, it's not just limited to people with BPD, is black and white thinking. Believing something or someone to be all good or all bad, all right or all wrong, and nothing in between. A lot of people have this going on, might not be aware of it. Just trying to whip through these quickly. Another one is the shoulds and the musts, Because if you start a sentence with I should, right there you got a thought distortion going on. It's not really going to be helpful for you. But thinking or saying I should or I must, it sets up unrealistic expectations. And that can see people with the internalized, critical inner critic of an abuser. Well, I should do this, I must do this, I'm supposed to do this. They think I'm that because I didn't do this, that, the other. It's like how the mind matrix expands of this alternate reality of repetition compulsion and the themes in your life that are your life story, but they're not really your authentic life story. They're the story of what you know consciously that you've been through, but there's so much more you need to know and find out about yourself. And another thinking thought trap or trap is mind trap, is like memories in the situation that can trigger an upsetting memory that can lead a person to believe that danger is present and like in the here and now, when maybe it's coming from the past, even if that past is 3 weeks ago because you just left somebody, or your past in childhood. And so another thinking mind trap is critical self, which is the internalized internal critic of an abuser, being self-critical and putting ourselves down, taking blame for situations that you really aren't responsible for. So it's defining yourself again in the alternate reality of the critical individual who, in most people's cases, cluster B.